Hello and most welcome to 1067. We will today make a lecture in Midtown. We have lovely weather, as you can all see here. A wonderful July day. Two blood oaks are showing their faces to us. And here we have the pharmacon of the digitalis. Both poison and incredible antidote to cardiac problems. It definitely takes much less lives than it saves. It must be hundreds of thousands of lives every year that the digitalis takes. And it is a pretty momentous day today, because this is the first time we can make a clear connection between philosophy in the guise of Martin Heidegger and what we learned earlier on in neurology and in the helping of our next that understanding came to me from the reading directly, or more directly anyway, of Being and Time by Mark Witherell. I will start with my commentary, a bit different than I usually do these things, and the reason for that is to give a foundation in the knowledge that I'm presently in after my sort of revelation yesterday. And that is the relationship between being and beings. So this is what I wrote, 1067. In Heidegger there is not a need for a new ideology, neither a new philosophy, a new way of politics, or a new way of understanding Nietzsche or anyone else. None of these things are the message that is proclaimed in the writing of Heidegger. And none of these things is what Heidegger is trying to put forward. What he wants to do is something absolutely unique, something that is looking at understanding itself, not what is in understanding, but the very modus of understanding. And this is why there can be no normal, so to speak, regular academic understanding of Heidegger, just as it cannot be any regular understanding coming from common sense, how we usually handle these things. We cannot start with the things, their properties and their relationship, how they differ and how they are the same, to understand the meaning of being, or being itself. This is all ontic. This is what is getting, so to speak, established once we forget the Seinsfrage, the question of the being. But all these things, and this is my understanding, this is my revelation, they do come from being. Somewhere they come from the Seinsfrage, the question of being. It all stems from being as such. So what Heidegger is proposing is meaning is that by studying relations, the differences, the sameness, the origin, etymology is a large part of the endeavor of Heidegger. Those things will make it possible for us to trace back to being. Think of a large treasure that has been lost, but it has left remnants, coins, small pieces of jewelry all over the town. We try to collect them, which is fine. But Heidegger proposes something even more. Looking at the trail the remnants are giving, we can find our way back to being. The greatness that is the treasure itself, instead of having to make do in collecting the pieces. So he doesn't want us to collect the pieces. This is what we are usually doing. What he wants us to do, that is to see what they are pointing to. Follow the trail. It is very similar to etymology. Etymology is one aspect, but there are several. Heidegger in his book Being and Time shows us the path, or how to find the path rather. It's an open investigation. And all these need to be done very carefully, because by confusing beings with being, we will make do for the smaller stuff we found spread out. The shekel, the rupee, the dinar, the centavo, that is all part of the treasure, and thereby collecting those instead of finding the origin, the whole treasure. The forgetfulness, the amnesia, is forgetting that there is a whole treasure and making do with the little things that we find. And by finding the origin, all what we have before will shine even more, because now they are with their true origin. Now we also have the why, and that will make the shekel, the dinar, the piece of jewelry, the wristband, the chain will shimmer even more, because now we came to the background. So my mistake is I thought a disregard of the beings were necessary. And it seems when you read the book, and this is maybe one of the reasons do not read the book directly, it seems that he's criticizing beings, or that he has a negative take on them in some sense. Ultimately, wrong, that is. This is something I read into the text, and now it's been sort of revealed to me that is not in the text itself. It's not to be found there in the text. beings are not bad. They are all good because they are stemming from being. So they are of the treasure. They've been spilled from the treasure. Without wanting to be blasphemous here, and I apologize before, this can be compared in some ways to how humans are made in the image of God. But we are not as perfect or good as Him. But we are neither completely imperfect. No, the beings in Heidegger are very important because they are the different relations, and those relations will carry us, will lead us to the path to being. They are the only lead we have. Without a treasure that's been spilled, the shekel, the dinar, the centavo, the peso, we will be completely lost. And that was a tremendous revelation for me. I always implicitly, and not pointed by Heidegger, assumed that he's criticizing beings, seeing them as lower. But once this realization was in place, much more understanding came to me. They are not lower even, they are just secondary, derived from being in its greatness, in its ultimate glorious shine. Pressure them, take care of them. It is just when we start destruction, I think that led me to an understanding that the beings should be destroyed or pushed away somehow. I think an easily made mistake. I'm not excusing myself, but I think it's an easy mistake to do. But it's the why question, and the destruction is not of the beings, but something that I read into the beings, that they are the whole and everything is to be found there, or a particular use of them. They do tell the beings, but the why question is the true treasure. And by following the path, and that's the path in the book, Being in Time, we follow the lead, the little things, and little by little they will take us to the Seinsfrage, using what we already have. Don't push it away. That is destruction, destruction. I think it's the word also that made me think of destroying things or something. But do remember that beings are from being. And this is something that postmodernism, I would say even modernity, not quite have understood. This is the lead to my next paragraph. The attack on beings, things like seeing the past or our beings as oppressing people, being racist, oppressing different parts of society, or just being stale, being constructions, not having the true spirit, not being the light in itself. And the first example here is going to be Rousseau. He felt that civilization itself, our intellectualization, our abstraction, that was the problem. And that we should discard that, put it aside, and go to the naturality of being beyond the being somehow. Pushing them aside, attacking them. And he saw that the true sense were to be found in the primitive. He only was true to what was the case, to being. And this is of course a sneak attack on beings. A way of attacking the jewelry that is spread, and also attacking the possibility of finding the treasure, the origin. Also repeated by Schopenhauer, who says that will itself, also part of being, is the reason for all evil. And by giving away will, or destroy it, we can find peace. I think this is repeated in modernism and also in postmodernism. And beings are put to constant violent attacks, called to be oppressive, relics of the past, uncomfortable, complicated, demanding, non-meaning, repeatable, not being of knowledge. And of course all these things are true to a certain part. This is what I say, my mistake is an honest one. But the relationship, how it works, came clear to me for the first time yesterday. And that is, this is not what Heidegger is pointing to. And that the attacks, I realize now, is the crisis in meaning. All of traditions are being under attack, and a lot have already been discarded as being stale, uncomfortable, of lower value constructs, like a suit that doesn't really fit. It's too tight over the chest, or more usually over the belly. And sometimes the all beings are even called evil. The evil times, the dark Middle Ages, the evil times of colonialism, the evils of the old period, how people were mistreated, how they were malicious, vile, and how low and bad the beings were and are. It did not contain anything of goodness or anything that is worth keeping. Get rid of the spread out little jewelries we find, because they're not worth it. Well, if you put it on the scale, they will amount to very little quantity. But the true quantity is in the treasure. Therefore, the little things, the shrapnel we have, the unsatisfying things that Rousseau thought, and Schopenhauer, and modernists and postmodernists it is still good because it can lead us etymologically, and maybe you can call that archaeologically, to the being, because they all have of being. They're not from being. Of course, this is the tremendous surprise for me. I had no idea. Mark Rathel helped me with that. Is the second Rudolf Gachet, without a doubt. Once we disclose the beings, this is destruction. So that terrible hard word is the disclosure of the beings. Seeing what they are for. I can give a hint here. Maybe before they were overvalued, held in too much great esteem. They were confused most definitely by Aristotle and Plato for the real thing, for being. A mistake, yes, but that doesn't mean that they are bad. That it is what puts into inquiry in being of time, that very thing. And I would say even, I completely changed my meaning here, thanks to Mark Rathel. Keeping the beings could be one of those traits that actually make Heidegger so unusual. And although his destruction sounds like he's a postmodernist, and that we should get rid of the beings, that is very far from the case. Beings are benevolent to some extent. Once we disclose them, sort of understand is the word, that they are not monosemic, because that misunderstanding originates in the special take of Dasein that could be called me or I. It's that lower way of seeing it. And as guiding angels, the beings are like guides, shower, pointers, apostles. And this is understood clearly by Dreyfus. And to the question, is he not very conservative, Heidegger? He answered yes. That was also a help, because he upholds things that no one else upholds. He keeps the old language, and he says the dealing with the world, unsere Sorge mit Welt, is very important, because that is the true beings, and that will inform the beings to sort of make them heal, to make them full again. So by caring, Sorge, about the beings in this more loving way, not being sloppy with them, because sloppiness is that modus that is sort of indicated by the reversal of the Aristotelian idea, the confusion between beings and being. That reversal makes us sloppy with the beings, not careful. And that would put us even further away from where we want to be. Next paragraph, I putting it up a notch. That beings is not wrong could be the biggest bomb ever when it comes to any philosopher. But it could be understood in the way that everything has an origin, a father, a why, so to speak. And rather than understanding destruction as destroying beings, it is rather to use them in the manner they were meant to be used. And this can be seen in the best example in his treatment of words. He does not discard them. He doesn't say they're obstacles. But by understanding the current meaning first, starting where you're at, and then finding an old, more archaic meaning, as in ancient Greek, we will find an A and a B, and then we will have a direction. Isn't that great? That will make understanding more encompassing, little by little. By understanding the ousia, how it is today and how it used to be, we get a trajectory, a direction. And although it's weak, the many different trajectories are bound to point to the same treasure. So the way of approaching being is actually through beings, but in a particular way, not the Aristotelian way. No, that is destruction. Destruction means destroying the idea of only one mood, so to speak. Opening that up. And the very seeing of different modes makes that the different trajectories, the different directions, from ousia, from Estein, and others, will be revealed as going in the same direction. We will understand that they are moods. Could be said to be the lacking key. That does not mean that they get destroyed, as I previously erroneously believed. But what destruction means is destroying of the idea of only one mood. Several moods will make it polysemic, and therefore the stale, distasteful knowledge will be seen to be polysemic. It's the Necke cube, it's the Klein bottle. It will have several meanings. And the very mood is here thinking that it is only one mood. So we miss out that the moods are changing. So we get sort of another dimension. And this is the dimensionality I mentioned before. The interpenetrative mode, or interpenetration as mode, is much more correct. I'll repeat that. Interpenetration is mood. Then we get the bigger dimension. This is what beings are. And by understanding that, Heidegger means once we understand that, we can understand how they are all different, the beings. We are lacking this bit, so to speak, the mood, the interpenetration, something I called before focal setting. That is the missing key. And all of a sudden, much more opens up. And although this will not simply acquire to a mode of 1 and 0, or true or false, it will still be truth, non-excluding truth. And possibly one can't even understand what that is until one goes further on the journey in finding being. The forgetting of the why is completely literal. It is, in this case, not a metaphor for forgetting the why. It is literally down to ground the why. The why strictly is not there, or it's not seen, it's not disclosed. The why and the mode have a relation. And then it becomes clearer that monosemism is an illusion. There is nothing behind it. Nothing could ever be monosemic. It is just lacking an important part of the puzzle. Something that I implicitly, to some extent, understood already with Wittgenstein's philosophical investigation, that monosemism itself is not a possibility. And the destruction could be said to be the destruction of the illusion of monosemism, that it is a possibility. It could also be seen as a lack of skill, not seeing the interpenetration as something that is controlled by Dasein or is the same as Dasein. Then you don't control the different modes, because there is no one mode only. There is no flatlander, 1 or 2 dimensions only. It's a lack of exactness. It's a sloppiness. And when we notice that sloppiness indirectly, we just call it monosemism. It is a bad excuse, so to say. It is something we blame. When we don't reach meaning, we call it monosemic. And therefore we should not attack monosemism, because it is a misunderstanding on the individual plane. And all attacks on monosemism will therefore be counterproductive. Destruction is being put in the most simple form ever, and it is destruction of the meaning of monosemism, or the whole excuse of monosemism. There is a similarity, this is the next paragraph, between destruction, and deconstruction. Destruction is to see to the misunderstanding, or rather the forgetfulness of the why question. What we forget is it is not the content of our understanding that is important. It is the understanding itself. Could be understood, or should be understood, as how we do things, how they work, how we are together with them. And the example I gave yesterday was Tombstones, for instance, I don't know how they are made, but by understanding that, I gain something. I gained a meter for understanding my own knowledge. I thereby know where it sits. Thereby I will get to know being a bit. By mixing everything and saying I understand tombstones, I understand this building I'm standing in front of, I mix and I sort of mix away understanding of what I really know with what I don't know. You can still use tombstones as a word, but I will have little or no idea how they're made, the weight of them, or not even the quality of them. And of course this to a certain extent leads to the lack of meaning in language, in our thinking and also in our doings. It is an inflation. And it's a mistaken identity, which would be my next paragraph here. And that is seeing the contents of the understanding as the thing to look at. This is a way of trying to pre-grasp and being too anxious, too greedy. This is this very greediness that makes it impossible to take in the whole, being open. Instead we grasp for the content of understanding. And our greediness, our want for knowledge, is that drives us. It's an urge, it's a thirst, it's a need, and we cannot easily resist it. But understanding this relationship will help. Once you understand true meaning is in being and everything stems from that, maybe the first, mixed with anger I would say, and discontent and dissatisfaction, will calm a bit. In the beginning not so much, but afterhand more and more. And we will be able to wait, not reach out, preemptively grasp for everything. This grasping, this clenching, chewing, as I said some 20 lectures ago, chewing on a bone and mistaking the blood that comes from your own mouth as meat. But the bone doesn't contain anything. It is the sheer greed or the need. It's not even greed, it's need. It's an essential need. We want knowledge. Wanting to be close to being is absolutely natural. But that is seeing the content of understanding as the important. And that is what makes the concepts vacuous. This is what Schopenhauer opposed. But he didn't see that our own grasping made them vacuous. Then, misled by his own thinking, he attacked what we needed. It's like an autoimmune disease. It's like allergy or arthritis, where the body itself attacks the ligaments, our own flesh. We can't see how beings come into the world as we participate. And therefore we attack something not knowing that that part is also an attack on ourselves. And this of course leads to more greed, more dissatisfaction, less understanding where you are going and why you're turning in the world. This is it. It is exactly this that is being monosemic. It's a curse for the individual himself, and it will diminish his or her effects on the world, diminish his or her possibility to live a satisfactory life. And it would be fear. It is not to be at home. It is not zu Hause. It is unheimlich, not at home. And this, of course, what I meant when now we found a bridge between Jana Iskens and the others, because this is, of course, the T2 muscles, those fast fight and flight muscles that grasp, because the grasping is literal. We grasp with our hands. Me standing here, I can feel the want to grasp my hands, make them into claws. It's the urge. And in the N2 neurons, we go so fast for what we think is the content of our understanding that we miss out in this haste, in this fight and flight response of the N2 neurons. We miss out on the why question. And it's a specific occupiedness, stressfulness, and fullness in a bad way. Everything becomes overcrowded. There is no room to think anymore. I will continue with the text and put a pause here. So once we get patient enough to approach being in the right way, we can relax this greed, this over exerted way of trying to understand directly. Let me continue here. Chapter 3. Back to Mark Rethel and Max Murphy, an overview of being in time. That was so instructive for me. And chapter 3. This chapter offers an account of the world and entities within the world as we encounter them in everyday life. We must not think of the world as simply the extended physical universe. Instead, Heidegger uses world to point to the whole, the unified totality of entities tied together by a complex network of significant relationship. To think of the world as a mere universe, a collection of all that is, it is to assume an occurrentist ontology. Heidegger's name for the entities that we encounter proximally and for the most part is equipment. Zug. The clothes we wear, the cars we drive, the doors we open, the ground which we walk, the pens with which we write, the signs we read, understand and follow. These are all primarily show themselves as available. To see this, imagine what it would involve to understand these entities as occurrent substances with occurrent properties. One could attempt to give an exhaustive description of a pen, for instance, in the language of theoretical physics. This description would involve measurable quantities such as the mass and the volume of the pen, an algebraic equation that describes the approximate shape of the pen, and dispositional properties such as the mechanical forces which would be exerted when the cap is removed or the button pressed. But in normal circumstances, when we're using the pen and it's functioning well, none of these properties show up in our experience, and we find ourselves aufgehen, absorbed in what we are writing. The pen itself is for the most part transparent or inconspicuous. However, in abnormal circumstances, which is very important, some of the physical properties, shape, size, mass, forces of the pen become conspicuous or obtrude in certain ways. The mass of the pen shows up when it's too heavy or too light. The shape of the pen shows up when it makes holding the pen uncomfortable. The internal forces of the pen show up when the cap is difficult to remove. But even in these cases, the pen is still not a merely occurrent substance. Instead, it has a deficient mode of being that Heidegger calls unavailableness. All the relevant parameters here are purpose-related and thus not reducible to current properties. It would be in vain to seek general criteria in Dasein-independent terms for what counts as too heavy, uncomfortable, or difficult. Moreover, the way in which one deals with a pen that is functioning poorly is not to take note of its occurrent properties, but simply to toss it aside and find the closest replacement. Because things are constituted rationally, equipment is essentially something in order to. Heidegger emphasizes that, strictly speaking, there is no such thing as an equipment. To the being of any equipment there is always belongs a totality of equipment in which it can be equipment that is. Each particular item of equipment is defined structurally as a node in a network of relations to other available entities, to projects and activities, and ultimately to Dasein. The pen, for instance, fills a place defined by its relationship to entities such as paper, ink, and desks, to activities such as taking notes, drawing, or signing checks, and to the roles and purposes of human beings engaged in these activities, such as being a student, being an artist, or paying bills to support one's family. Unlike current entities, which are essentially independent of each other, available entities are essentially interdependent. An individual piece of equipment only shows up as such against the background of its involvements, bewandtnis. A world presents us with an organized totality of entities on the basis of which particular entities are able to be encountered in their involvement, ordinarily as equipment. Dasein inhabits a world by assigning itself to a way of taking a stand on its being, in terms of which it makes sense of its particular project and activities. So the world is that wherein Dasein can take up the tasks of interpreting and taking responsibility for its existence. This is very close to the Wittgensteinian language game. Remember the slate and the people making the wall. Heidegger calls the general structure of worlds worldhood. The structure that allows for a particular world to exist is the structure of the meaningful relationship of entities, the way they refer to and relate to each other, thereby affording us different possibilities for being. Heidegger calls this structure significance. The world and its worldhood form the background against which we understand any particular entity with its specific involvements. This background tends to withdraw from us. As long as things are working together smoothly, we don't notice it or attend to it. It is typically only in cases of breakdown, of a disruption to our ability to fluidly cope with our environment, that we notice how things are supposed to refer and relate to one another. It is within this framework that Heidegger presents his critique of Descartes' conception of the physical world and space as res extensa. Just as the available entities of our everyday environment are not characterized in terms of measurable physical quantities, this environment, Umwelt itself, considered a spatial realm where Dasein resides, is not primarily understood as a mathematical manifold or metric space, but rather as a network of meaningful spatial relationships which are defined in terms of Dasein's activities. As we make our way around the world, we encounter available entities laid out in significant places and regions to which they belong. When things are placed where they belong, they are appropriately accessible to us, and our involvement with them goes smoothly. Otherwise, they just lie around and obstruct our activities. This could be the reason why Rousseau attacked beings. He felt the obstruction. It is in terms of the varying availability of available entities that the phenomena of distance and remoteness, Entfernung, first show up for Dasein. In everyday life, when I say that something is close by or far away, I primarily refer to the ease or difficulty involved in my accessing. The walk, the path, it's a hill, it's downhill. So if my daily commute involves an hour-long flight between cities a few hundred miles apart, there is a distinct sense in which these cities are closer together for me than either of them is to the rural countryside in between. Accessing the latter might involve making reservation at the bed and breakfast, renting a car, looking up directions and bringing appropriate attire. In our everyday understanding of distances consists in comparison of this sort, and it is only through a process of theoretical abstractions that we come to think of space as defined in terms of geometrical relations which can be measured with any degree of precision. Let me comment here directly. Think about the tombstone. Me not knowing how to use it will also cause that in my thinking process I will use it wrongly or sloppy, the wrong way, not as here was explained in the proper way. There will be disjunct, there will be an obtrusiveness, it won't be correct. This is not how we regularly see concepts, as having a fitted, normal way of using it. And therefore, the res extensa is pretty grave as a fault, it makes a lot of troubles. The Cartesian framework, which considers these latter relations to constitute the essence of the extended world, consequently regards our everyday experience of space as yes, what I'm saying, insignificant, and takes an abstract, albeit useful, model of space as a characterization of what space really is. But it is only on the basis of a familiarity with our everyday environment that the spaces of geometry and physics can have any significance for us. Lack of understanding that, or believing in res extensa, makes us not understanding the concepts we have to our disposal. I will not know tombstone. Although I will know pen, I might put tombstone into an ontological question. What's the meaning of life, tombstone? This is a misuse of being. And the misuse of being is caused by this general space, so to speak. Dasein is a being in the world. Chapter 3 focused on the world. In this chapter, Heidegger provides an account of everyday Dasein. Who is Dasein? As noted at the outside of Division 1, Dasein is an entity which is in each case I, myself. Yeah. Heidegger initially uses terms like self, I, and subject in a formally indicative fashion, that is, to direct our attention in an ontologically non-committal way to the phenomena in question. Such terms point to the fact that Dasein has a minus. In other words, that I have some sort of exclusive and unique relationship to my existence. It is my affair and I'm responsible for it. They also point to the idea that there is something essential about me, something that endures across changes. But we must suspend our tendency to think about such phenomena as the I, the self, the subject, in, very important, our currentist ways, in the way we might, for instance, talk about the particularity and the constancy of an object. Very good. The I must be interpreted existentially, without assuming that there is some stable and self-identical substance that determines who I am. In fact, Heidegger argues that who I am is subject to change, and Dasein can exist in quite distinct modes. Modes coming up here. Heidegger, but the starting point for answering the question, who is Dasein, is the description of our everyday being in the world. Of course. How do other Dasein show up to me, and how do I show up to myself in the course of my everyday commerce with the world? The identity of the self is in everyday life constituted by those meaningful activities through which the individual partakes in norm-governed social practices. Our relationship to other human beings is built into those practices. These practices are, as we have seen, defined in terms of the structure of significance, a network of available entities, and the purposive relations to one another. But that purposiveness presupposes an use for an agent. For instance, a craft person builds things for the use of other human beings. Each individual person before she can take responsibility for her own existence in an authentic way, already finds herself as having been interpreted in terms of participation in social practices. As an epigram, we can say that in everyday human existence, the public is primitive and the private is derivative. We always inhabit a shared world, and the way we exist in this world is always essentially structured by others. Conversely, the world also frees Dasein. That is, it opens up. It's freedom in the beings. Opens up space where others can be encountered as Dasein. We automatically recognize the traces of other people in the things with which they dwell in the world. Indeed, it's built into our experience of things that they belong to others, are well suited to specific people, and so on. When one takes it upon oneself to trespass on another's property, for instance, it feels different. One moves and carries oneself differently than when one has been invited in. In his or her actions, the trespasser expresses an interpretation of him or herself as disobedient to norms. Thus, even in our uncooperative or criminal activities, we never cease to interpret ourselves in terms of the very norms we violated. Not only do we find ourselves in a world that is fully structured by the activities and purposes of others, it also seems to be basic structure of our being, that we are constantly taking measure of how we compare to or differ from others. Heidegger calls this Distantiality, Abständigkeit. Everyday Dasein thus exists as being with others. It takes its measure from other Dasein. It has a special cognizance of them as other Dasein, and it has a primordial familiarity with other Daseins in the sense that we understand how to engage with others as Dasein. They show up as Dasein with. The others are those from whom, for the most part, one does not distinguish oneself. Those among whom one is too. This with is something of the character of Dasein, very important. The two means the sameness of being as circumspectively concernful, being in the world. Thus, in addition to its ordinary concerns with available entities, Dasein also exhibits solicitude, Fürsorge, a care for and about other Daseins. So other Daseins are mega important, so to use a common term. An upshot of this is that in our ordinary everyday activity, there can be no other mind's problem. Hooray! Thank God! We do not infer that others are Dasein, in which case there would always be room for a skeptical doubt about the accuracy of our inference. To the contrary, we couldn't even have a sense for ourselves as Dasein without already relating to other Daseins, and we immediately unreflectively cope with others as Dasein. It's a very common trait among schizophrenics that they don't know if other people are conscious or that they are Daseins. You see, this is running in parallel both with Jan Anskan's A.M. McGilchrist and what we understood previously from neurology and the development of modernism. So who is this everyday Dasein? It is not a subject who could be constituted as she is. independently of any relationship to other Daseins. It is quite the contrary, given our ordinary everyday submission to norms. Insofar as one follows the norms, one is merely one among many. Our distentiality disposes us to interpret ourselves in terms of those norms. But beyond that, we often fall into our inauthenticity, that is, into standing in subjection to others. That is, we simply accept unthinkingly the ways in which one does things. In doing so, we disburden ourselves of responsibility for our own actions by acting as an anonymous followers of norms. This anonymous subject of self is who refers to when we say things like one waits in line, one drives on the right side, or one just doesn't do that here. In doing so, the who I am is really the others to whom I defer in deciding what to do. Heidegger uses the impersonal pronoun one or they, das man, and the related expression of oneself, man selbst, to refer to the anonymous everyday way in which Dasein generally understands itself. Das man makes possible the social conformity against the background of which the individual can understand itself, its activities and others. However, without the possibility of authenticity, in which the individual takes responsibility for her own decisions and thereby attains a unique identity for herself, there would be nothing but social conformism. In purely conformist scenarios, no single individual is ultimately responsible for the behavior of the group. It is not hard to see how this could and does lead to various forms of immoral behavior, but Heidegger does not put it in those terms. He merely says that in Dasein's everydayness, the agency through which most things come about is one of which we must say that it was no one. I'm not responsible. And it's sort of what happens when we assume res extensa, that geometry is out there, space is out there. We also take on a guise of immorality, I would say. It's an attitude of not being responsible. And we use concept without, like tombstone, without really knowing them. And we become inauthentic. We are no longer real from the outset. We are only real as existences. We become, or we try to become, that's more proper, because we cannot. We try to become like the objects we see around us. But that can never ever happen. No matter how much you wish for it, or no matter how you wish for it not to be so, it doesn't have any influence on that at all. You are something completely different from the objects you encounter, because you are in the world and the things are not in the world. They are for you, and that is a different modus. Confounding them won't change that fact. And I think many people think that if I confound that, it must be so. I think Heidegger here is brilliant. He's pointing to, and I would say that's the part of his great mission. He points out that that's an impossibility, that's a mistake. And it's just a mistake. And therefore, in a way, immorality is a mistake. It's not an attitude or an intention. Immorality is a mistake. Very interesting. Well, I think I'll end there. That's quite enough for today. Brilliant. I think Mark we thought is a new starter of a new interesting debut of this. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now. Let's have a look at this lovely oak. Still too bright to have colors, although it's a cloudy day. Well to be noted.